For victory and glory!
I am with you.
Then rise and fight!
Yes, my lord!
When most people hear the name Leonidas, they imagine a heroic king standing against impossible odds. Hollywood movies show him as a fearless leader, a noble warrior who sacrificed everything for freedom. His story is often told as one of the greatest acts of courage in history. But the real story of Leonidas and Sparta is far more complicated. Behind the legend was a society that was built on extreme discipline, fear, and brutal control. Sparta was not just a city of heroes. It was a state where life was harsh from the moment a child was born. To understand Leonidas, we must first understand Sparta. Sparta was very different from other Greek cities. While places like Athens valued art, philosophy, and debate, Sparta focused almost entirely on war. The entire society was designed to produce soldiers. From childhood to adulthood, every part of a Spartan man's life revolved around fighting. But this system came at a cost. Spartan society was extremely strict. Individual freedom was limited. Personal choice was often sacrificed for the power of the state. The goal was simple: create the strongest army in Greece. Even the birth of a child was controlled by this harsh thinking. According to ancient sources, newborn babies in Sparta were inspected by elders of the state. If a baby appeared weak or unhealthy, it might be abandoned. The Spartans believed that only the strongest should survive. This practice may not have happened exactly as dramatic stories describe, but it shows the mindset of Spartan culture. Strength was valued above everything else. Leonidas was born into this world around 540 BCE. He was part of the royal family, but even royal children did not escape the harsh Spartan system. In fact, Leonidas likely experienced the same brutal upbringing that shaped every Spartan warrior. Sparta was ruled by two kings at the same time. This unusual system helped balance power. But even kings had to follow Spartan law. The real authority of Sparta came from its strict traditions and its military culture. Spartans believed that fear could weaken a soldier, so boys were trained to ignore pain, hunger, and exhaustion. Emotion was seen as weakness. This was the environment that shaped Leonidas. To many modern people, the Spartan way of life seems shocking. Children were separated from their families at a young age. Discipline was harsh. Survival depended on toughness. But for the Spartans, this system created the most feared warriors in the ancient world. By the time Leonidas became king, Sparta already had a powerful reputation. Other Greek cities respected Spartan soldiers because of their discipline and courage. Yet this strength also hid a darker truth. Sparta's power did not come only from its warriors. It also depended on a large population of enslaved people called helots. These people worked the land and provided food for Spartan citizens. Without them, Spartan soldiers would not have been able to spend their entire lives training for war. This hidden system allowed Sparta to appear strong and proud, but it also created constant fear of rebellion. So when we look at Leonidas as a hero, we must remember the world he came from. He was not just a brave king standing against enemies. He was also a product of one of the harshest societies in ancient history. Sparta was famous for its powerful warriors, its strict discipline, and its fearless soldiers. To outsiders, it looked like the strongest military society in all of Greece. Spartan men spent their lives training for battle, preparing for war, and defending their city. But there was a secret behind this strength. Spartan citizens did not spend their days farming the land or producing food. They did not work in fields or perform heavy labor. Instead, they focused almost entirely on military life. So the question becomes very important. If Spartan men were always training for war, then who worked the land? Who grew the food? Who kept the economy alive? The answer was the helots. The helots were a large population of enslaved people who lived under Spartan control. Most of them came from regions that Sparta had conquered, especially an area called Messenia. After defeating the Messenians in long wars, Sparta forced many of them into slavery. These people became helots. Unlike typical slaves in other Greek cities, helots belonged to the state rather than to individual owners. They were tied to the land and forced to farm it. Each year, they had to give a large portion of their crops to their Spartan masters. This system allowed Spartan citizens to focus entirely on becoming warriors, but it also created a dangerous imbalance. The helots greatly outnumbered the Spartan population. In some estimates, there may have been 7 or even 10 helots for every Spartan citizen. This meant that Sparta lived in constant fear. If the Helots ever organized a rebellion, the Spartan system could collapse. Because of this fear, Spartan leaders used harsh methods to control the Helot population. They believed that keeping the Helots frightened would prevent rebellion. One of the most disturbing traditions connected to this control was the practice linked to the Cryptia, which we mentioned earlier. The Cryptia may have been a secret operation carried out by young Spartan warriors. According to some ancient sources, these young men were sent into the countryside at night with weapons. Their task was to watch the Helots and eliminate anyone who appeared strong, rebellious, or dangerous. The goal was simple: reduce the chance of revolt. By targeting potential leaders among the Helots, the Spartans tried to weaken the possibility of organized resistance. Some historians debate how often this happened, or how organized it truly was. Ancient sources sometimes exaggerate dramatic events, but even if some stories were exaggerated, it is clear that Sparta ruled its Helot population through fear and violence. Another practice shows how deeply this control affected Spartan society. Each year, Spartan leaders officially declared war on the Helots. This unusual ritual allowed Spartans to kill Helots without committing religious crimes. In ancient Greek belief, killing someone without proper reason could anger the gods. By declaring war, Spartans avoided this problem. This ritual reveals something important about Spartan society. Their military culture was not directed only at foreign enemies. It was also aimed at controlling their own population. Helots lived difficult lives. They worked the land, produced food, and supported the entire Spartan system. Yet they had almost no rights. They could be humiliated in public. Some accounts describe Helots being forced to drink too much wine and then being displayed to Spartan children as examples of what drunken behavior looked like. These humiliations were meant to teach Spartan youth what not to become. For the Helots, daily life meant fear and uncertainty. Yet despite this harsh treatment, the Helots were also essential to Sparta's survival. Without their labor, Spartan citizens would not have had the freedom to dedicate themselves completely to military training. In other words, the legendary Spartan warrior culture rested on the forced work of thousands of enslaved people. Leonidas grew up fully aware of this system. As a Spartan prince, and later as king, he would have understood that Sparta's strength depended on maintaining control over the Helot population. This does not necessarily mean Leonidas was personally cruel in every decision, but he was part of a system built on domination. The image of Spartan warriors fighting for freedom, which is often shown in movies, hides an important truth. Sparta itself depended heavily on denying freedom to others. Even while Spartans spoke about honor, courage, and sacrifice, the foundation of their society was control, and this constant tension created a unique type of warrior culture. Spartan soldiers knew that defeat in battle could have terrible consequences at home. If the Spartan army was destroyed, the Helots might rise in rebellion. The entire social order could collapse. So every Spartan battle was not only about defending territory, it was also about maintaining control over their own society. This fear may have made Spartan warriors even more determined on the battlefield. When Leonidas later faced the massive Persian army at Thermopylae, he was not just defending Greece, he was defending the fragile structure of Spartan power itself. The Spartans believed that discipline and courage made them stronger than any enemy. But behind their famous shields and spears stood a hidden truth. A society built on strict control, constant fear, and the labor of an oppressed population. Understanding this reality does not erase the bravery shown by Spartan soldiers in battle. Fighting against overwhelming odds still required incredible courage. However, it reminds us that history is rarely simple. Heroes often come from complicated worlds. In the next part, we will finally arrive at the moment that made Leonidas famous across history, the Battle of Thermopylae. By the time Leonidas became king of Sparta, the Greek world was facing a massive threat from the east. The Persian Empire was the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever seen at that time. It stretched across huge territories, from Asia to parts of Europe. The Persian king Xerxes wanted to expand his control even further. His goal was clear: conquer the Greek city-states and bring them under Persian rule. Many Greek cities feared this invasion. Some even chose to submit to Persian authority rather than fight such a powerful enemy. But others refused. Sparta and Athens were among the cities that decided to resist the Persian advance. Even though these Greek cities often argued with each other, the Persian threat forced them to work together. The plan was simple but risky. Greek leaders decided to block the Persian army at a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae. This location was perfect for defense because the mountains on one side and the sea on the other created a very narrow path. In such a tight space, the huge Persian army would not be able to use its full numbers. A smaller Greek force could hold the pass and slow the invasion. Leonidas was chosen to lead the Spartan soldiers who would join this defense. According to ancient sources, Leonidas marched to Thermopylae with 300 Spartan warriors. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were elite fighters who had already proven themselves in battle. But the Spartan force was not alone. Several thousand soldiers from other Greek cities also joined the defense. Together, they formed a combined Greek army determined to block the Persian advance. The Persian army, however, was enormous. Ancient historians sometimes gave extremely large numbers, possibly exaggerating the size of Xerxes' forces. Modern historians believe the Persian army was likely in the tens of thousands, still far larger than the Greek defenders. When the Persian army reached Thermopylae, Xerxes expected the Greeks to surrender quickly. Instead, Leonidas and his allies stood their ground. For several days, the Greek soldiers held the narrow pass. Their heavy armor, strong shields, and disciplined formations made them very difficult to defeat in such tight terrain. The Persian attacks were fierce, but the Greeks pushed them back again and again. Spartan training showed its strength during these battles. Their famous formation, known as the phalanx, allowed soldiers to stand shoulder to shoulder with overlapping shields. Each warrior protected the man beside him, creating a powerful defensive wall. The Persians struggled to break through. For a moment, it seemed that the small Greek force might actually stop the massive Persian army. But history often turns on small moments. A local man named Ephialtes betrayed the Greek defenders. He showed the Persians a hidden mountain path that allowed them to move around the Greek position. When Leonidas learned that the Persian army was about to surround them, he faced a difficult decision. According to many historical accounts, Leonidas dismissed most of the Greek army, allowing them to retreat and survive. He remained behind with his 300 Spartans, along with a few hundred soldiers from other Greek cities who chose to stay. Their goal was not victory anymore. Their goal was delay. By holding the pass a little longer, they hoped to give the rest of Greece time to prepare for the coming invasion. The final battle was brutal. Surrounded and greatly outnumbered, the Greek defenders fought fiercely. Ancient sources describe waves of Persian soldiers attacking the small group of Spartans and their allies. Leonidas himself died during the fighting. The remaining soldiers continued to battle even after their king had fallen. Eventually, the Persians overwhelmed them with arrows and numbers. The defense of Thermopylae had ended. From a military point of view, the battle was a Persian victory. The Persian army continued moving deeper into Greece. But the story of Leonidas and his warriors quickly spread across the Greek world. Their sacrifice became a symbol of courage and resistance. Later Greek victories, such as the naval battle at Salamis and the land battle at Plataea, eventually forced the Persians to retreat. Because of these later successes, the stand at Thermopylae became legendary. Leonidas was remembered as the king who stood against overwhelming odds. However, when we look deeper, we can see that the story is more complicated than the simple heroic version often shown in movies. Leonidas did not stand alone with only 300 warriors. Thousands of other Greek soldiers fought beside him. Their contribution is often forgotten when the story is simplified. Also, Spartan culture itself was built on strict control and military dominance. The warriors at Thermopylae were incredibly brave, but they were also products of a system that demanded absolute loyalty and sacrifice. For a Spartan soldier, retreat was often seen as dishonor. So the decision to stay and fight may not have been purely heroic choice. It was also part of the warrior code that defined Spartan identity. Still, the courage shown in that narrow pass cannot be denied. Standing against a powerful empire required extraordinary determination. The image of Spartan warriors holding their shields together while facing a massive army became one of the most powerful symbols in Western history. But the legend of Leonidas has grown larger over time. Stories have added drama, emotion, and heroic speeches that may never have happened. Hollywood films have turned the battle into a story of pure good versus evil. The real history is more complex. Leonidas was brave, but he was also a king, raised in a harsh system of discipline and control. He was a leader shaped by a society that valued war above almost everything else. understanding this does not reduce his courage. Instead, it reminds us that history is filled with people who are both heroic and complicated. In the final part, we will explore the lasting legacy of Leonidas. Was he truly the noble hero that legend describes, or was he also part of a system that created fear and domination? After the smoke of the Battle of Thermopylae faded and the Persian army marched deeper into Greece, the story of King Leonidas did not end. In fact, it was only the beginning of a legend that would grow larger with every passing generation. For the Spartans, Leonidas became something more than a king. He became a symbol of courage and sacrifice. His final stand against the Persian army showed the world that even the most powerful empire could be challenged by a small group of determined warriors. But history is rarely simple. Behind every legend is a complicated truth. In Sparta, the story of Thermopylae was used as proof that their harsh way of life was correct. From childhood, Spartan boys were trained to believe that dying for Sparta was the greatest honor. Leonidas's sacrifice became the perfect example for them. Teachers and commanders would tell young boys about the 300 warriors who stood beside their king. They described how they fought until the very end, refusing to surrender even when they knew death was certain. These stories inspired generations of Spartans to live and die the same way. But outside of Sparta, people saw Leonidas differently. Some Greek writers admired his bravery. Others questioned the Spartan system that created warriors who were taught to value death more than life. They wondered whether such a society was truly admirable or dangerously extreme. The historian Herodotus wrote about Thermopylae not only as a story of heroism, but also as a warning about the cost of war. Centuries later, the story of Leonidas continued to change. Poets wrote songs about him. Sculptors carved statues, showing him as the perfect warrior. Writers turned him into the ultimate symbol of courage against impossible odds. Over time, the harsh details of Spartan life were often forgotten. The suffering of Spartan slaves, known as helots, was rarely mentioned. The brutal training of children in the Agoge was soft or ignored. Instead, the focus remained on the dramatic image of a king, standing with his warriors against a massive enemy army. Modern movies and books help shape this image even more. In popular films, Leonidas appears as a fearless hero leading perfect warriors into battle. The Spartans are shown as noble defenders of freedom, while the Persian army is portrayed as evil invaders. But real history tells a more complicated story. Sparta was not a democracy like Athens. It was a military state built on strict control and constant warfare. Its society depended heavily on the labor of enslaved helots, who worked the land while Spartan men trained for battle. Leonidas himself was both a brave warrior and a product of this harsh system. He believed deeply in Spartan values. He believed that honor and duty were more important than survival. For him, standing at Thermopylae was not only a military decision but also a moral one. To Leonidas, retreating from the Persian army might have meant saving lives, but it would have meant losing honor. And in Spartan culture, that was worse than death. When the final battle began, Leonidas and his warriors fought with incredible determination. Even after the Persians surrounded them, they continued to resist. According to ancient writers, the Spartans fought with swords until their blades broke. Then they used spears. When those were gone, they fought with their bare hands. Eventually, Leonidas was killed in the battle. The Persians, recognizing his importance, reportedly fought fiercely over his body. His warriors tried desperately to protect it, launching several counterattacks to recover their fallen king. In the end, the Persian army captured the body of Leonidas. Xerxes, furious at the resistance he had faced, ordered Leonidas's head to be cut off and his body displayed. This was meant to send a message to the Greeks. Resistance would bring only death, but the message had the opposite effect. Instead of frightening the Greek city-states, the sacrifice at Thermopylae inspired them. The story spread quickly throughout Greece. It became a powerful reminder that the Persians were not invincible. Soon after, the Greeks united more strongly against the Persian invasion. In later battles such as Salamis and Plataea, they eventually defeated the Persian forces and pushed them out of Greece. Because of this, many people believe that the sacrifice of Leonidas helped change the course of history. His stand at Thermopylae bought time for the Greek alliance to prepare its defenses. It gave the Greeks hope during one of their darkest moments. Yet the debate about Leonidas continues even today. Some historians see him as one of the greatest military leaders in history. They admire his courage, leadership, and willingness to face impossible odds. Others argue that the legend hides the darker side of Sparta. They point out that Leonidas fought to protect a society built on extreme discipline, violence, and slavery. Both views contain elements of truth. Leonidas was not simply a hero or a villain. He was a man shaped by his culture, his beliefs, and the harsh world in which he lived. Understanding him means looking beyond the legend. It means recognizing both the bravery of his final stand and the brutal system that produced it. In modern times, the story of Leonidas still fascinates people around the world. His name appears in books, movies, video games, and documentaries. The image of the 300 Spartans standing against a massive army continues to capture the imagination of audiences everywhere. Why does this story remain so powerful? Perhaps it is because it represents one of the oldest themes in human history: the struggle of a small group against overwhelming odds. People admire courage, especially when it appears in moments of great danger. The Spartans at Thermopylae knew they were likely to die, yet they stayed and fought anyway. That kind of determination leaves a lasting impression. But the true story of Leonidas also reminds us that history is never simple. Every hero has flaws. Every legend hides complicated truths. The real Leonidas was a warrior king who believed completely in the Spartan way of life. He fought for honor, for duty, and for his city. His final stand at Thermopylae became one of the most famous battles in history. But whether he was a noble hero or a symbol of a brutal society is a question that each generation continues to ask. Perhaps the most accurate answer lies somewhere in between. Leonidas was both a fearless leader and a product of one of the harshest cultures the ancient world had ever seen. His story forces us to think about what courage truly means. Is courage simply the willingness to fight and die? Or is it also the ability to question the systems that shape our lives? The legend of Leonidas will likely continue for centuries to come, but the real story behind the legend is far more complex than Hollywood has ever shown.